finally hit that point where I just was tired. I was tired of living the life I was living. I was tired of feeling hollow, tired of feeling empty, and tired of just being depressed and not wanting to live anymore. My name is Dillon Thomas, and this is my story. Throughout, I guess a lot of my life, it felt like I was always alone, abandoned, and never fit into anything, and really never had my place with my people. And it pretty much started really young, at birth. In the hospital, my dad, I guess, saw that I had red hair and told my mom that I wasn't his kid, and she must have been doing something just because I had red hair. So he left the hospital right then and there. And my parents, their marriage and stuff before I was born, my dad was alcoholic and a drug addict, so he was really abusive and stuff like that. And at about 3 weeks, my parents had separated, and later on they'd get divorced. It's probably a little bit around whenever I was a year old, they got divorced officially. But when I was 9 months old, I guess my dad kidnapped me at gunpoint from my mom. He came and was trying to get me and my brother, but he had just loaded me up at the car with a gun and took me to another state for a couple weeks or for an extended period of time, and no one knew where I was. And he finally got back in contact with my mom to set up a meet to drop me off and give me back to her. And so she got the police involved in everything like that, because she was grabbing me back from him. And he had given me to some random guy and just told him to walk down City Park and meet a lady and give me over to her. And so when he came out, some random guy had given me to my mom, and the police raided it, and it wasn't my dad. But so that was kind of how it started right from the beginning of my life. And it just continued on. But and then just growing up, my mom and my dad, she had split custody, so I had weekends with him. Me and my brother would go over there on weekends and stuff like that. And every time that we were over there, it was always he was pitting us against our mom and always kind of painting her in a bad light, making it seem like she was the bad guy, and she was constantly defending herself from it. And around that time too, it was a little older in life, maybe fourth or fifth grade or somewhere around there. And my mom ended up getting remarried. And when she got remarried, my stepdad, he had 2 kids of his own from his prior marriage. So introducing those 2 families, there came with a lot of strife and conflict. It was kind of hard for everybody to merge and get along. But so there was a lot of stuff going on there. But at the same time, my dad he was in and out of jail, but he had gotten out of jail, and we were going with him on weekends, and we were with our stepbrothers as well. So there was a lot of just pulling in every direction, kind of just a lot of chaos throughout our childhood. And so when my mom, she got remarried, and my stepdad, he had 2 kids from his prior marriage. And at that time, I was spending weekends with my dad still, and we had our stepbrothers, so merging the families was really difficult. And I always felt like I had to keep the peace, and that I was the go-between that was always trying to hold everybody together. And I put the responsibility on myself that it was my job to make sure everybody was living at peace with each other and that had good relations with each other. So it felt like I was doing a terrible job as a kid, because they would always fight, and it had nothing to do with what I was doing, but at the time I wasn't aware of that. And when I'd go to my dad's house, he would always put us in not great situations. I remember there was a few times he would just take us to a bunch of drug houses with a bunch of drug addicts, and they'd be cutting up drugs in the other room, and we would just be sitting there told to be quiet and just stay in a room basically. And then the part that was, I guess, even more difficult with that is we'd go to church the next day with my grandma in their church, and my dad would start talking and be an active member in the church on Sunday, but in drug houses on Saturday. And he finally would get arrested for having drugs on him and just living that lifestyle, and ended up going to jail. Being with my dad too, like some more of the crazy situations that he had us in. I remember not exactly what we were doing, but I remember driving back down Highway 50, and it was the middle of the night, and he pulled over at one of the rest stops, and I remember he put me in the driver's seat, and he gave me a pretty big knife and pretty much told me, like, hey, if anyone comes up and opens his door, like, to just stab them. And he showed me how to put the car in drive and go, and pretty much said take off and he would find me. And I was in 6th grade, so yeah, that's kind of stuff that you're not really prepared for, like mentally, like you don't really grasp the entire concept of like being told to stab somebody. It was just like, okay, like this is kind of weird, but the weight of that. And I also remember too, like there was a time where he had taken me to a school dance, and I was still in about 6th grade, and he was out of jail still at this point. And I remember him, just the advice that I would get was always random stuff that kids don't really, I guess, need to know. But he was telling me that I needed to start getting a belt and wearing a belt with a really big buckle. And the reason behind it is, in case anyone ever pulled a knife on me, I could take the buckle and swing it around and use that like a weapon. And again, being in the 6th grade, like, don't really have a lot of people pulling knives on you or doing anything crazy. And he was always just putting a lot of like fear and paranoia that people were after you, and that you needed to always be ready to be willing to hurt or kill somebody at all the time. So that was kind of established early on with him. At that time, like, we decided we didn't want to hang out with him and go to any more custody with him whenever he got out, and we were kind of not wanting to be around him. So the people at my grandma's church started saying that it was our fault that our dad was relapsing because we were unsupportive kids, and we were bad kids because we weren't choosing to be around him and not wanting to surround ourselves with him. So early on, I kind of got a really bad taste for church people and the church as a whole, because we grew up and we always were in church, and like my parents got married at this church here at Pueblo Christian Center, and just early on, a lot of people in the church put a bad taste of church in our mouth, so it never seemed like it was anything but something to do on Sundays. And there was really never that deep, like, intimate connection with God. And further on, a couple more years, my dad had gotten back out of jail, and we decided we didn't want to be with him anymore because of previous times. So what he was doing was pretty much stalking us. He'd show up to our house in the middle of the night, throw rocks at our window, like 1 or 2 in the morning, try to sneak us out and try to make us come with us or with him. And he would have people follow us, and he would follow us and always keep tabs on us and call us or send us messages letting us know that he knew what we were doing or like what things we were doing. So there was always that like fear and like paranoia of someone was always after us and kind of following, to where it was really hard to build trust with people because you never really knew what people's intentions were or why they were doing what they were doing. Yeah. But and then around that time, when he had been arrested again, because he was in and out of jail most of my childhood, and yeah, and during that time too, like, he had gotten arrested, and I was somewhere in middle school, I don't remember exactly, but my older stepbrother ended up, like, he was molesting me and my little stepbrother at the time that this was all happening. So like, a lot was playing on my emotions because I didn't feel like I could go anywhere or talk to anyone, because I felt like it was my responsibility to keep the family together, but then I also didn't trust anyone because of the like trauma from my father. And Yeah, that being molested by my stepbrother, it was a close family member, so it caused a lot of like confusing emotions and like feelings of like really low self-esteem and kind of like self-hate because it felt like there was something wrong with me that I knew it was wrong, but didn't know what to do with that emotion and stuff. So I started kind of detaching and shoving my emotions down because I kind of felt um, like alone and betrayed, kind of like I was stuck in just like this darkness and I was by myself in it. And with having three brothers, all of us within 3 years of each other, um, there was a lot going on all the time with sports and with everything. So never really felt like we had time to connect with our family, and it was kind of just go, 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 and wasn't much into it. But and in school, I never really did good. Like with a lot of the schoolwork, I always was having low grades and stuff like that, and it took an emotional toll on me because I felt like I was really dumb because I was able to do things and like build things and do things that was not school related really well, but I wasn't able to do well in school. So I felt like I was just dumb, and that kept pushing in there was something wrong with me feeling. And then I also tried sports because I didn't really have like an out, or I didn't have a healthy coping mechanism or really any way to express or deal with the emotions I was shoving down. And all the sports that I tried out for, I was always good and athletic, but I was never great or good enough to be in like a starting position. So that just kept stacking onto the feeling of I wasn't good enough and that I was a failure and I didn't belong or fit in, because if I was, then I would fit in. Like if I was meant to do something, that I'd be better at it instead of always falling short. So that that made me feel really bad about myself, to where I had a lot of like low self-worth. I didn't value myself very much or have a high esteem for myself. And going into high school, it pretty much followed the same. I was a smaller dude that wasn't great at anything, and like as much as I tried, I couldn't try hard enough to ever do good in things, and still failing school. And all the groups of friends that I had hung out with and built relationships with all started going their own ways. So I kind of felt abandoned by them, and a lot of my really close friends moved away. So I felt like everybody that would come close would eventually leave. So I started building up walls and trying to protect myself from that. And about the age of 16-ish, I would say, my best friend at the time, he had pretty much, he died because he jumped out of a vehicle, and there was a lot going on with that stuff. But when he jumped out of the vehicle, it caught and he hit his head on the pavement, and it ended up killing him. And his parents had called and asked if I would be a pallbearer and carry his casket. And they said I was one of the only really good influences in his life and really close friends, which threw me off a lot because I didn't feel like I was a good person at the time, and I felt like I was a hindrance to people, not anything good for them. So that threw me off there, and that kind of not knowing how to process those emotions and those feelings, and not feeling like I had anyone to talk to, just pretty much it came out in a negative way of I felt like if I was a better friend, maybe there was something I could have done to not get him in that situation to where he ended up dying. I wouldn't say I blame myself for it, but I felt like I should have been able to do something better and be a better friend, and maybe it could have impacted the outcome. But so like really early on, I was just building up walls and distrust for people because everyone that came into my life was leaving, and it felt like they were abandoning me and kind of betraying me, and not knowing what to do with those feelings or how to process them. I would just keep shoving it into that box and keep stacking it up and just detaching, and it came out as kind of just being a wild child. I'd just kind of act bad and act up and get into a bunch of trouble a lot just because I didn't know what else to do with myself and didn't really care too much about the consequences of my actions. I knew there would be consequences, but it didn't really make too much of a difference at the time. And yeah, that pretty much went through high school. And then in my junior year, I decided that I wanted to enlist in the military, because that was always a dream for me, was to just join the military, because I felt like it was really cool to be like G.I. Joe and fight for my country and feel like I would finally find a place that I belonged, because I was always good at shooting and being outdoors and all the stuff that isn't like glorified in school. Like, so I felt like that would be a good place for me. And whenever I decided to go talk to the recruiters and join, I signed up, and I got pretty much zero support from my family. They thought it was a terrible idea because I think they didn't want to lose me. But so it felt like I was pretty much making bad decisions, and it felt like it should have been something honorable and something awesome, like you're fighting for your country, you're serving your country, like that's an amazing thing. But it felt like it was the wrong decision and that no one was supporting me, and I was alone in making this decision. So like it wasn't a good decision. And yeah, so with that, like I pretty much joined feeling like no one was for me and that I was going to have to make it myself, and to just continue to not rely on anybody or trust anybody or let anybody in, and just do it myself and do it with hard work and just pushing through everything and stacking and shoving all the emotions back further and further and just keep pressing and ignore everybody else. And when I got into the Army through basic training and AIT, I did extremely well. And I finally felt like I had found the place I belonged, because I was good at shooting, good at hiking, good at running, and all the stuff they asked for us didn't seem really hard. It seemed like it's pretty easy and stuff that I excelled in. And then I got to my first duty station in Texas, and it was, to me, it was awesome, because I finally got to be in the actual Army and get to do all the real stuff that I thought was going down. And the group of guys I was in my first unit, they were all older than me. I was 18, and they were all in their mid to late 20s and early 30s. So when I came in, they were always drinking and partying, and I never really drank or partied or did anything bad in school. I just kind of was just wild. But so I started drinking with them, and it started out just casually, just kind of drinking. And there was a few nights I had taken it too far, but that was just because when you're 18 and you're around a bunch of people that have been drinking, they get you pretty destroyed, and you don't make good decisions. But there's never really a problem there, because shortly after, we ended up getting orders and deploying to Afghanistan, probably within 4 months of me getting to my duty station. And we shipped out on the 4th of July. So it was pretty cool to fly out, like with the fireworks, doing America stuff. So it felt pretty cool. And while we were deployed, I got to build some really close bonds with some people and stuff like that, but it was not what I was expecting it to be. It was, I guess the unit I was in, we didn't really do a whole lot of like running and gunning action stuff that you see in the movies and that you think you're going to do. It was kind of more just security and patrolling around the bases and checking on the locals and doing raids on their stuff to make sure they didn't have any contraband on the base. So it kind of felt like a little bit of a letdown from what I was expecting. And whenever I had come back, I had made some really good close connections with people. And when we came back, there was a miscommunication with my family, so I came back to nobody. So I felt like kind of betrayed and abandoned, because at the time I didn't know there was a miscommunication. I just thought they didn't show up. So after being deployed and then coming home to nobody, and everybody's with their families and everybody's celebrating, and you come home, and I was 19 at the time. So yeah, it was a hard blow to take, because it felt like basically it confirmed that feeling of abandonment, and I was alone and no one really cared. And then my roommate, who, when we came back to the States, he was also my roommate and my gunner in Afghanistan. So me and him became like brothers. And when we moved back, everybody was with their families, so they all went back, and he ended up getting married pretty like soon whenever we got back, but they were waiting to have the actual ceremony and stuff, like, so the paperwork didn't officially process, but he moved out of the barracks room, and which left me in there by myself for about a year. I was living alone, and everybody was still older than me, and they all lived off base, so I would pretty much go to work, come home, and be completely alone for every night for about a year or so. And around that time, like it kept pushing that anyone who gets close is going to abandon you, and they don't care about you, like that. They'll always pick other things over you, and you're in it alone. And there's, no matter how close of a bond you build with somebody, at the end of the day, they'll leave you. And then, like, living alone, I kind of started drinking more, and it went from casual drinking to just drinking for something to do, because I was alone. So I would just kind of drink and hang out and play games by myself. And then, I was also, at the time, I was only 19 still, so I had people buying me alcohol, and they didn't see any problem because I wasn't causing any trouble. But they would just keep buying me alcohol, and I would start drinking a lot, more and more every night, because I realized that it worked in the sense of numbing the feelings that I had, of the feeling of abandonment and not living up to expectations, and just kind of always falling short and being alone. It numbed a lot of those feelings, but it was only temporary. So you'd have to drink every day, because as soon as you got sober and stopped drinking, the feelings would come back. And I would never drink at work, because I was able to distract myself with all that. But I remember when that was kind of going on, I had gone home for Christmas, and everybody kind of had that expectation of my deployment was what you see in war movies. So they're thinking that, like, I was getting shot every single day and getting blown up every single day, and it wasn't like that. And when you tell people that not a lot happened, they think that you're just saying that to, like, protect the story, that it seems more hardcore, that you don't want to talk about it, when in reality, like, nothing happened. So kind of felt like a failure. Like, the one thing that I was good at, I wasn't able to actually fight for my country, because we didn't get into any real fights or anything like that. So it felt like I was just letting everybody down, and even including myself, to where I felt like a fake, like that I was a guy who was deployed and everything. So whenever I went back after that leave, I kept drinking more and more and more to further separate myself from those feelings, because just throughout all of life, just kept feeling like a failure and like alone and abandoned. And whenever I was drinking, I'll have to kind of edit that part out, but whenever I would drink by myself in the room a lot, I had always kind of, when I was drinking a lot by myself in the room, like every now and again I would drink to the point of blacking out, and whenever I would black out, emotions would start bubbling up. All the ones that I was suppressing would start coming out, and I would remember waking up, and my hands would be like bleeding from like hitting walls, and I would just feel emotionally exhausted, because I would have bits and pieces of remembering of just all those emotions flooding at once. And so I would just keep drinking to shove them back down, and it seemed like it would get worse and worse. And eventually one night I was drinking to the point where I just got extremely depressed, and felt like I didn't want to live, because I just felt like such a failure, and like that I was just a fraud and that no one was with me and no one cared about me and that I was completely alone. And I was in this room by myself, and it was just middle of the night, no one was there and no one was ever there. But I had bought a gun from somebody, and I had it in my drawer at the time. And I remember grabbing it and like having it loaded, and I put it up to my head, just had that thought of not necessarily that I wanted to die, but I just didn't want to live. Like, kind of didn't see the point in living if I was going to be alone and no one was ever going to be there for me. What was the point of life? It didn't seem like there was any real reason to be alive. And if the one thing that I was supposed to be good at, that I was good at, I was still failing at that too, then it's kind of just that point of why try, why keep going? So I had the gun in my head and the finger on the trigger, and at the time I didn't know, but it was definitely God intervention. I just kept picturing my family and my mom crying when they found out that I was dead and that I had shot myself, and that took a toll on me emotionally. So I ended up putting the gun away and just started drinking more to try to block all those feelings that I was feeling, because after I had put the gun away too, I had the feeling like something inside of me had died, like something was missing, that there was just like a void in my life. And I even had the thought of I was so bad at being a failure that I couldn't even kill myself. That's how much of a failure I was, that I failed at killing myself. So it was a very dark place in my life, and I was just completely emotionally detached and numb toward everything, and I didn't care about myself, didn't care about others, didn't really have any value or worry of what was going to happen to me at all. And shortly after that too, I just kept drinking every night, and I was supposed to give one of my friends a ride to the airport, and we were hanging out watching a movie, and I was drinking, and remember him saying, like, don't drink too much because you have to give me a ride early. And I was like, all right, yeah, like that's fine. And that didn't happen. I ended up drinking the rest of the bottle of vodka I had, and it was a fifth of liquor, and I ended up blacking out. And I remember bits and pieces, but not much of that night. And I remember laying in bed, and then I remember being in my truck and driving around, and I was just being dumb and drinking and driving and not being coherent at all. And I remember driving my truck and jumping railroad tracks and like just jumping through ditches and doing all of this through residential areas. So it wasn't like out in the hills or anything. It was like in the city. And I guess I had eventually ran down a fence and jumped through a drainage ditch to where I sheared off a control arm on my truck to where I couldn't steer or drive. So after I had wrecked my truck, the cops were called, and they showed up, and me being drunk and feeling bulletproof, I tried to fight with them, and they won for sure. Like they had ended up wrestling me down and taking me to jail. And I don't really remember too much of going to jail either. Like, I remember at one point they had me in a chair with my feet handcuffed to it, my hands handcuffed to it, and then a mask over my head because I was just acting crazy and just being crazy. And when I finally had come to, I was in a jail and didn't know how I got there, didn't know where I was, didn't know like what was going on. And I noticed my name on this whiteboard on the outside of the room, and I noticed there was a name next to my name on it. So I had asked one of the guards, it's like, hey, one, where am I? But two, what's that name next to my name? And they kind of had told me that I was in the jail and that name next to my name was the detective investigating my case. And started kind of piecing clues together, and they were doing a warrant roundup that weekend, and I wasn't in the majority of the group. They had a separate group full of a lot of people, and then the cell I was in was with like 3 other people, and 2 of the people that I was in there with had just shot and killed somebody, and I was in that group, and there was a detective with searching, or a detective's name next to my name, investigating my case, and I had remembered being really emotionally angry and hitting something to the point where I couldn't feel my hands anymore, so I started like hitting with my elbows, and I don't remember what it was, so I thought the worst, that it might have been a person or somebody, so I thought that I had hurt somebody really bad and ended up with the guys who had killed somebody, and it turns out it wasn't. They had arrested me and charged me with a DWI, and then they also charged me with a felony, or they were trying to charge me with a felony for assaulting the police and fighting with the cops, and they were going to charge that for a felony. And whenever I finally got a chance, and I made a phone call and I got bailed out, and I ended up having to pay it, and it was 10 days after I'd turned 20. But I had a bail of $103,000 that I had to pay, and I had to pay 10% of that. So being 20 years old with $10,000 bail just to get out of jail, and that wasn't including court costs or restitution or any of the lawyer fees or anything like that. So pretty much I was broke and had nothing to do and nowhere to go. And yeah, thankfully I had no bills at the time, so I was able to make the payments. But that kind of gave me a little bit of a wake-up call, but to where I realized that I probably needed to get my drinking in check too. And my buddy, he never made it to the airport either, so I felt like I had let him down a lot. But whenever I had called to get bailed out, I called my parents and all that, but it felt just really embarrassing, and like I was really ashamed and kind of just felt really bad, like I made a really stupid decision and just felt dumb about it. And I remember at the time too, like talking with my parents, they were reading my arrest report, and they realized I had gotten another tattoo. So they pretty much said that they were done with me, and they were fed up with me being just wild. So they said that I was cut off, and that they weren't going to be a part of my life anymore, and that like pretty much they were done with me. And that continued to add to the feeling of confirming that I was again alone, and at the end of it, even the closest people to me wouldn't always be there for me. Like when you feel that your own parents say they're not going to be with you anymore, it was difficult. Yeah, I felt extremely abandoned, and yeah, it was just a really, really hard time. But I had some friends that were that I had met at going to a church, because my parents came down and they had found a church for me to go to when I first got down there, and I made a connection with some people there, and I would go hang out with them on the weekends and stuff like that. And once I lost my license in the DUI, they were amazing people, and they would drive 30 minutes one way to pick me up, to drive 30 minutes back, just to let me stay at their house for the weekend. And they wouldn't charge me rent, they wouldn't charge me gas money, they didn't ask for anything. And I would help them do flooring and stuff on the weekends and work with them, because I felt like that was the only way I could really pay them back. But they would always make me go to church with them too on Sundays, which was good, because during that time I was going through all the court case of everything and trying to see what the outcome of the case was going to be, because it was going to either be really bad, and that's all I could really think about. It was going to be really bad, because if I were to have gotten a felony, I would have gone to jail for however many amount of years. But with the felony, that would have caused me to get kicked out of the Army with a dishonorable discharge, because I was still in the service. Mm-hmm. And dishonorable discharge is almost worse. It's pretty much worse than a felony. So having both of those on my record would be like the 2 worst things that you could possibly do. I was facing, and I was 20. So I figured that was kind of the rest of my life right there, and there's nothing I could do to bounce back from that. But So going to church with them, I finally had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment where I broke down and I went to the altar and gave my life to God, kind of, I guess you could say, because I would take it serious, but only on Sundays in the middle of the church. But then as soon as we left, nothing would actually change. And I started trying to press into God a little bit and tried to read a Bible that someone had given me on and off. And I felt like there was comfort in God in that point where I didn't necessarily feel completely alone. There was like a small glimmer of hope. But the case, they ended up dropping the felony down to a misdemeanor, and it turned out to be, I just ended up getting probation and having to do community service and pay fines, which was a lot better than going to jail and being kicked out of the Army and a lot of the bad stuff that came with that. So I was really thankful for it. But around that time as well, the unit I was in merged with another unit, so we had gotten new people. And the new people that we had got an influx of soldiers that were close to my age now. So instead of being the youngest guy and the next closest guy being 5 years older than me, everybody was around my age now. And so we started to party a lot. And once I started hanging out with that group of people and partying a lot more, completely threw all the God stuff back out the window because I didn't put any more effort into it and kind of put that sideline and just was like, okay, well, thanks God for the hooking me up and not letting me go get my whole life ruined, but see ya. And didn't take it serious anymore, so I went down back into the just drinking all the time to where I was drinking close to like a fifth of liquor every night and just kind of raging and partying with all these people. And there was even a few times where a few of the guys would be doing drugs, and like I tried a few of the drugs, but it was never something that I really got hooked onto. But like doing drugs when you're in the Army, when you can get kicked out for that, kind of put the reality of like it didn't, like I was back to the not caring of the consequences, because that was a major consequence would be getting kicked out of the Army, which I had just happened to not get kicked out of the Army for being dumb. And but just like hanging out with these people, it kind of felt back to like I found a group of people that I belonged with and I could hang out with, because we would just party. And if you had alcohol, you were the coolest guy. Like whoever brought the most alcohol was the coolest guy, and the wilder you got, the more fun it was, kind of thing. And but I would still drink a lot to like where I'd black out, and there'd be a lot of times where I'd black out, and it seemed like my personality switched. And I would go from just having fun to like wanting to hurt people, because all those emotions would come up. And like even my buddies that I drank with a lot and hung out with would say I was like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Like whenever I was sober, I was a really cool dude. But when I crossed that point, like I just became like a terrible person, like a monster that would just go after anybody for anything and try to fight anybody, and just didn't care what the outcome was. It didn't matter if I won or lost. Like it didn't matter. It was game on. And which caused a lot of problems. Just in general, there was a lot of like just not good nights, and a lot of relationships ruined, a lot of friendships broken because of it, and there's a lot of people hurt in the way. And that just kept going on for a while, and then we ended up with that unit getting sent to Korea for 9 months on a rotation. And still having that wild mindset when we got out there, we would go out to the bars, and they had a bar like across the street, like they called it like the Ville, and it was like a mile-long strip of just bars right outside of the base, and we'd pretty much go out there and just start partying and raging out there too, and that was just kind of the thing to do. And just being wild and not caring leads to a lot of dumb decisions made. And there was one night I had drank and I had blacked out, and that was kind of a normal thing for me, was to black out. I think I probably blacked out more than I didn't black out, because it was just a full throttle all the time, like yeah. And we were at a bar, and I don't really remember too much of this night either, but as I was walking out of the bar, I had seen this prostitute sitting on this guy's lap, and I had walked by and slapped her on the behind as I was walking by. Didn't even look. It was just being drunk and stupid, not thinking, just doing it just to do it. But that got the owner of the bar's attention, and he started following me outside of the bar and screaming at me and yelling at me. So I remember like turning around and charging him, and I just grabbed him and I threw him against a wall and then threw him on the floor, and then I started walking away. And he was kind of just laying on the ground staying down because he was probably in his 40s or so. And as I was walking out, an older lady that was with him, that I think was his wife, started running behind me yelling for the MPs and the police because they had patrolled the areas that we were out drinking at. And she kept screaming, so like I ran back and I grabbed her too, and I threw her against a wall, and she laid on the ground and was like screaming and like crying and yelling. So I took off running to get away, and I ended up managing to make my way back onto the base without getting caught or being found. But one of the guys I was out with, the police had stopped and questioned him, and he pretty much told them like everything, like who I was, where I lived, what unit. So whenever I made it back to my room, I thought I was safe. And about an hour or so later, there was a really aggressive knock on my door, and they were calling my name out, and it was my platoon sergeant, my leaders, and they had grabbed me and taken me to the MP station to basically like get me and turn me in, and I got arrested. And because I had assaulted the Koreans after hours on their own area, and it wasn't on base and it wasn't during duty hours, I had to face the Korean government. And so the Army really couldn't do anything to me, and because it was above them. And so that was like good and bad, because I was like, well, they can't do anything, but the Koreans could, and they did. They said that there was 3 options for me, and one was to go to court, try to fight it, and hope for the best. The other one would be go to court, accept it, and just accept the consequences. Or the third one was the victims would get a number of what they felt that they deserved in restitution, and you would pay it to them, and then they would drop all charges. And that was an actual legal way for them to handle cases. So I was hoping for the third one, and they were not. They wanted to press the full amount of charges, and they wanted me to get the maximum punishment. And I was at that time facing 10 years in a Korean prison and like had over $100,000 fines. So it was a pretty scary time, because being in another country, being alone, and pretty much being told like I would get left there if like it went through, that I was going to be left in a Korean jail and or prison, and that it was all on me to handle. And I remember going back and forth to like the Korean like police station and stuff like that. And I remember the first time walking in, there was an American who had just went through trial because he had stabbed a Korean like 40 times. So as soon as I walked in, everybody was just, you could tell they hated me. Like they did not like the like Americans, and I was going in there for assaulting Koreans. So they were not fans of me, to say the least. But as time went on, was hoping that it would just work itself out, and we tried to do a lot of stuff, try to go talk to them and reason with the people, and they didn't even want me to come near their club or bar because they were afraid. And I got deemed as a threat to like society, so I wasn't allowed to leave my barracks room without having an escort with me. Like I had to have basically a handler everywhere I went. Like I couldn't cross the street and go to the gym without having someone watch me, because they said I was a threat, and they weren't sure. Like they said it's just unpredictable and causing too much problems. And it was one of the bigger incidents while I was there. It was one that people I didn't know and other people knew about, and it made its news around all of Korea, that what I had done. And when time kept pushing on, started getting closer to that feeling of I was going to get stuck there because nothing was happening. And we were there for 9 months, and this was like the second month it happened. And I was getting close to the 6th or 7th month, and nothing had happened yet. So I was thinking the worst. I called my parents, and because we had kind of restored a little bit of our relationship, and it was still pretty rocky, but we were enough to like talking. And I remember calling them and kind of like breaking the news to them, like, hey, I might not make it back from Korea. And yeah, they were not excited about that. They kind of were like, well, basically like, you made your bed, time to lay in it. Like, it's on you. There's nothing we're going to do or can do or want to do. Like, so that's for you to handle. Like, you're going to have to deal with your consequences, and which is kind of how it was. But thankfully, God had intervened again without me knowing at the time, because there was a Korean captain in the Korean Army who I didn't know and didn't talk to, but he went on his own terms and talked to those club owners and told them basically he was going to shut their club down for prostitution and drugs if they didn't take a restitution for me. So they finally agreed to it, but they took a lot of time to do that. But and it was a sigh of relief when they finally agreed to it, because I remember getting called into, and my commanding officer at the time, he didn't like me because I would always cause a lot of trouble, but it was always after hours. So I was a great soldier during the day, and during work hours I was like excelled and did extremely well. But then after work hours I was always causing problems, and always with the group of people, it was either I was getting in trouble or the people that I was with were getting in trouble, and we were known for getting in a lot of trouble a lot. And I remember he brought me in, and he was smiling and told me like, well, we've done everything that we can do for you, and we're no longer going to help you. The U.S. government will no longer help you, and you're on your own. So good luck. I hope everything turns out the way it should. And then he kicked me out of his office after basically telling me that they weren't going to help and I was on my own. And then that's when the Korean went and had talked to them. So I was really thankful for that, because they ended up accepting a restitution. And I made it on the very last flight out of Korea with my unit, because they said if all the case was still going while they left, that I was going to have to stay there until it was done. So I got to leave on the very last flight out and barely got out by the skin of my teeth. And whenever we had returned, I had fulfilled my contract, and I only had a couple months left in the Army. And there was nothing they could really do because of it being such a mistake that it was on the Korean government. So they were hoping that would happen. And when my commander found out that nothing happened and I just had to pay fines, and then I got brought back to the States, he wasn't too happy with it. But then somewhere on the time of whenever I got back, I'm not sure exactly when because I didn't know about it, my mom had written a really high-ranking person in my unit and basically said that I was being treated unfairly and that there was a lot of bad stuff going on, and that it was all my senior leadership's fault, and that they were like targeting me, which on paper I was a complete dirtbag. And the only reason why I had gotten away with a lot of the stuff I had gotten away with is because I was known for being a hard worker and a good soldier and a good teacher and being just a good worker. And that was like the only thing that was keeping me afloat, was my reputation. And so once they got like a hold of that information, they called me in and basically just started tearing me apart, because they were saying that I was the one who had written this email and was trying to go behind them and undermine them and get them in trouble, when I had no idea what even was going on. I didn't even know anyone had written an email. And at that moment, my commander told me that the 3 months left that I had in the Army before I got out, he was going to do everything in his power to kick me out and make me lose all my benefits because of that email. And he pretty much had reason because of everything on paperwork. I was bad enough to where they could have started the paperwork. So he started trying to force the paperwork of getting me to get kicked out. And I had done 4 years at that point, and I had done all 4 years honorably and did my deployment to Afghanistan, did my rotation to Korea, and I even extended my contract to stay to go to Korea to help teach and train people that were in my unit. And everybody that I'd worked with had known this, and they knew that I was a good soldier, just not a good person. And I remember they pulled me aside and pretty much told me, like, hey, we'll make a deal with you that if you make any mistakes, we will extend your contract and keep you in to kick you out. But they didn't feel that it was right that the commander was trying to kick me out after I had served my full term on like more of a personal issue instead of an actual legitimate issue. So they pretty much hid and snuck me around the last 2 months I was in the Army, and got it to where I was able to get my honorable discharge. So I was able to get like VA benefits and get the schooling and everything, because all of that would have been lost. So it would have been, the 4 years I was in would have been for nothing essentially. But and that was by the grace of God, like that happened, because the people that made that happen, they also, like, we had our own issues with personal issues with each other that they didn't like me and I didn't necessarily like them, but there was that fine line of respect of, I guess, But once I got out of the Army, I just kept drinking, because that was just a habit that had gotten into, like, the entire time I was just still drinking, and like didn't really care too much about what was going on. I just knew I was out of the Army and was glad at that point, and it kind of felt like that was just like a big mistake, even though it was like my dream. I felt like I was a failure, and that I had made a lot of mistakes to where I ruined the only opportunity I had, because the one thing I was good at, I wasn't allowed to do because of my own decisions and just being dumb and choosing the wrong thing and kind of ruining that opportunity. And whenever I came back to the States, I moved back in with my family, and I just kept drinking and like didn't really think too much of it. It just became a habit, and I was of age and just didn't think much of it. But I knew it caused a lot of like conflict and strife between our house, to where my mom wasn't a fan of it, and my stepdad wasn't a fan of it either, and they knew that the trouble it had caused me, but I didn't care, because I was able to numb all those feelings and all the feelings of failure and with just by drinking, because whenever I came back from the Army, it felt like everything I did was for nothing, because I was right back in the same house, the same room that I was whenever I got out of high school. So it felt like the whole 4 years of my life were wasted, because everybody else I'd known had been getting jobs and was moving on with their life, and I felt like I was just stuck and I couldn't go anywhere. And I would drink and I wouldn't hang out with anybody, because I didn't really have any friends, because I didn't want to make friends. I just wanted to kind of be left alone and do my own thing, because I didn't like being around people, because I didn't trust them, and felt like anytime I would go out would be when I'd get in trouble. So if I just stayed in, like, I could just drink and be left alone and just deal with my emotions that way. And I started getting like really lonely, because I would just go to work, come home, and as soon as I got home, I would just start drinking until I would like pass out and go to sleep. I would just do that every single day, and I was chewing and smoking at the time too. Like, I started doing that whenever I was in the Army, and so I just had a habit of using tobacco and drinking every single day. And this had been going on every day for close to 5 years at this point. And I remember just being really lonely one day, and my parents were out of town, and I decided to go out to a bar, and I ran into some people that I had gone to high school with, and so I started drinking with them and kind of hanging out and partying with them, and we ended up going to this house party. And there was these two guys that were getting into a fight, and I tried to let my guard down because I felt like I was just pushing everybody away and not giving anybody a chance. So I tried to do what I thought was the right thing and tried to break up the fight and like kind of be a solid dude doing it that way. And whenever I went and tried to jump in between the two guys, someone thought I was jumping in. So they grabbed like a rock or a brick or something, and they hit me in the back of the head with it. And when it knocked me unconscious, I hit my head on the concrete on the ground, and the two guys who were fighting stopped fighting each other and just started kicking me in the head whenever I was unconscious on the ground. And pretty much don't remember what happened after that. I woke up in a bathtub just bleeding and like spitting out a bunch of blood, and like I remember going home and like going and calling my grandma and seeing if she could take me to the hospital because I couldn't move my arms. Like I couldn't lift my arms above my waist or anything like that. So I went to go get checked out, and she had called my parents, and they stopped what they were doing and turned back immediately. And I think they were in New Mexico, and they drove back through the whole night and came back and were checking on me, and they were pretty upset that I was drinking because that was the constant was trouble would be every time I drink, there'd always be trouble or something bad following. And yeah, thankfully nothing was too wrong with me. Yeah, so pretty much after that all got resolved, my parents told me that if I wanted to keep living there, I was going to have to quit drinking and start going to counseling and deal with issues that were going on. And so I agreed to it, and I started going seeing a counselor, but I didn't quit drinking. I just started sneaking it in. Like I would hide bottles of alcohol in my boots and just walk in, and when you're drunk, you think you're sneaky, but you're not. You're dumb. You stand out pretty obviously. So I'm pretty sure they knew I was still drinking, but they were still letting me live there because I was going to counseling and kind of trying to figure it out. But I didn't feel like it was really doing much because I remember the counselor, after just kind of talking to him about stuff, he told me like, it just seems like there's a black cloud that just follows you everywhere you go, like, because it seemed like everywhere I was going, things would just get worse. Like no matter where I went, like almost like the opposite of the Midas touch, everywhere I went would get destroyed instead of turning to gold. Like things would just go bad, or bad things would just start happening. And it just seemed normal to me that it was just like life was chaotic like that, like just growing up with a split family and never fitting in. Everything that I was getting into would always just fall short and just never come through. But so after a while, I ended up not seeing that dude anymore and just kept drinking. And I was doing better at not being crazy as much anymore, but I would just started getting like super lonely. And I remember like I was drinking so much to the point where I started throwing up blood almost every day. Like if I drank or ate anything that wasn't water, I would throw up blood immediately. And like I remember sitting there looking in the mirror and just feeling like, man, like you're gonna die if you don't quit doing this. And it's just like, well, like so be it. Like who cares? Like at this point, like I was lonely and started like getting really depressed again, to where it's like it didn't matter. Like again, I didn't want to die, but I didn't care if I did. And I remember what I would do is I would take a little bit of alcohol and I'd put it in a cup and I would drink it real quick. And then as soon as I threw up the blood, I would immediately slam as like just swigs and swigs of liquor immediately afterwards. So then I wouldn't throw it back up, because that was my way of like cheating my body into forcing myself to be able to drink. And that went on for a couple weeks. And like even if I put in tobacco, if I put a chew in, like it would make me throw up blood. So there was really like nothing good that was going on. And like it was really not healthy or good. And I wasn't sure how much longer I would have made it in life, but I started getting like really, really lonely and just craving the interaction with humans, because like I would just go to work. I wouldn't really talk to people that much, and I would just work and do my thing, and then I would come home and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I wouldn't hang out with anyone. And whenever I got out of the Army, I didn't talk to any of the people that I was with, because when I got out, I felt really betrayed by a lot of them, because just as soon as I got out, like, no one talked to me or hung out with me at all, and I was still, like, I stayed in Texas for a week after I got out, and like, they wouldn't even invite me to go out to eat, like, the very next day. And so I had a lot of resentment toward them. So I didn't talk to any of my friends because I didn't have any friends, and anyone that I was friends with either moved away, died, or was doing other stuff, to where it didn't feel like it was worth putting an effort and trying to make connections with people. But after like about 6 months or so, that finally set in to where it was weighing on me a lot, because I didn't want to go out, because after the last time I'd gone out, I got jumped. And after that point, I started like carrying a gun on me with the intent of harming anybody who tried to do me wrong. Like, I had it in my head that I was never going to let that happen again, and it didn't matter what the cost or consequence was, where if I had to kill somebody and go to prison for the rest of my life or get jumped again, I was willing to do that, because I just never wanted to have that feeling ever again. And so being drunk and having a gun was not really the best combination, but that was pretty much how I was going every day and everywhere I went. And I finally got like lonely enough to where I wanted to go have human interaction, so I got in my car, and my parents were gone again this weekend, and I drove out to a bar and was just kind of hanging out at the bar. And I got to the point where I started blacking out, and like it was like fading in and fading out kind of, and being at this bar and talking with people in this parking lot, and I wasn't being malicious or angry or really anything, just kind of the way I grew up and the way I felt about guns wasn't how most people, I guess, feel about guns, especially when you're drinking. Is I didn't see the big deal of playing with guns while you were drunk in public, and that was definitely not okay. And so I was showing these guys a gun I had at the bar, and we were kind of messing around with it. And I remember a guy had cocked it, and it was a revolver, and he cocked the hammer back and he put it to my head, and it was pretty much touching my head. And he was like, and his finger was on the trigger, and he's like, "What would happen if I pulled the trigger?" And there was bullets loaded in it, and I told him, I was like, I would probably die, like, since, you know, it's loaded, because it didn't really faze me, because I had been drinking and was still pretty depressed and didn't care if I lived or died. And I remember he just kind of laughed and put the gun down, and like, I got it back from him, and I went and put it back in my car. And after seeing that, the bartender had called the police, and they ended up coming out and like arresting me. And on the way back to the jail, I was really drunk, and when you're drunk, you say stupid stuff because you think you're funny. And I had a pretty dark sense of humor, and it didn't turn out to be funny. And I asked the cop if he could just take his gun out and shoot me in the face, because I told him, like, well, it'd make this whole process a lot faster if you just did that instead of putting all the paperwork in. And they don't take that as a joke. They take it pretty serious. So they put me on suicide watch. So again, I don't really remember being processed too much of going through the jail, but I remember waking up in the suicide watch cell, and they take everything from you. Like, you don't have boxers or socks or anything, and they give you like a padded, pretty much dress that you get to wear that has Velcro, and like, that's about all you have. And it's really embarrassing and really not like a good feeling waking up wearing that, or just knowing that you're in jail again and still not figuring it out. But I remember it just started setting in and hitting me, where I was kind of trying to do like rough math in my head, and I figured that I'd probably, if I was to get prosecuted and everything, go to jail for probably a year or two or something like that. And I just started kind of accepting the fact that, like, well, I'm about to just be in jail, and I'm going to lose my car, my dog, lose everything that I have, like legitimately lose it this time, to where I'll be in here and there'll be nothing I can do about it. No one's going to pick up my slack or clean up my mess because it's mine. And I finally hit that point where I just was tired. I was tired of living the life I was living. I was tired of feeling hollow and tired of feeling empty and tired of just being depressed and not wanting to live anymore. So I had remembered growing up in church and stuff that like kind of like just God, like that God was there all the time. And remember like putting aside my pride and everything and just like, I don't care if I'm in jail and I'm with all these tough guys. I'm not going to try to be a tough guy anymore. Like, I don't care. And I broke down and just started crying and prayed and was like, all right, God, like, I know that we've had our touch and goes where I've talked to you a little bit and this and that. And I'm like, I know I'm not worth any of this, anything from you, and you don't owe me anything because I haven't done anything for you, and there wouldn't be any real reason why you should do anything for me. But I just was like, God, I'm tired of living like this, and I need you. And I don't know how or what's going to go down, but I know that I need you. I need something. And I was just sitting there crying, looking like a baby, and all the tough guys around, and the place you're not supposed to look like that. And then all of a sudden, like, I felt this peace come over me, because I felt for like the first time in my life that was the only time I was being honest and truthful, to where it was that point where I'm like, I'm not just giving like words, like I truly mean that I don't want to do this anymore. And after I'd felt that peace on me, I felt like everything was going to be okay, which the situation didn't make any sense because I was locked in jail. They had processed me through the jail. I was in the county jail in suicide watch, and I didn't get a chance to make a call to anybody to bail myself out because I wasn't told what I was actually charged with, or if they did, I don't remember what they told me. And the people in the booking didn't know, like, so they weren't like telling me anything either, and I was still pretty gone. So I had missed my opportunity to get out of jail, missed my opportunity to make a call, so there was no way I could do anything, and I was stuck in this little cell by myself. And there's people all around us and around me in the cell, in their own little cells, and they were just banging on the walls, screaming, cussing, just yelling the whole night. And then I remember kind of just sitting up, walking around, and one of the guards looked up at me, and I think I'd been there for a night or two, and she just looked up and was like, you don't belong here. And I agreed. I was like, yeah, I don't want to be here, man. Like, yeah, like I agree. I don't feel like I belong here either. But she actually just kind of looked at me and was like, there's something about you. You don't belong here. What's going on? I'm like, well, I need to try to make a call. I wasn't able to make a call or anything, and I don't know what I'm getting charged with, and all this other stuff. And she, I don't know if she's supposed to or not, but she had let me out of my cell to make a phone call, because it was during their, like, after their guard change stuff, and she was a new guard on, and she brought me out and let me use their phone, and like gave me a paper that had all the different bail bondsmen on it. And I called my mom, and I wasn't expecting them to do anything, because at this point, every time I'd gotten in trouble, I called, and like eventually there's the point where people just don't care anymore. Like, sorry doesn't mean anything, like, after a while. And that's kind of where I felt like I was at that point with them. And my stepdad, I guess, heard all the people banging on the walls and screaming and cussing and just screaming at the top of their lungs and not stopping. And he told her, like, there's something, like, oh, we need to get him out of there. Like, I know he's wrong, and there's, like, we'll deal with all that later, but we need to get him out of there, which was the only reason why my mom, like, actually ended up coming and like getting me out. And I remember when they finally got everything going to release me, they took me and they just took me to the hospital and made sure that I was clear and got cleared off like suicide watch to make sure I wasn't going to do anything crazy. And after that cleared, I remember them just being like, all right, you're good to go. And it was like midnight or 1 in the morning. And I just remember sitting outside of the hospital just on a bench, just waiting for my mom to come get me. And it was just like a mixture of emotions of like joy, happiness, sadness, shame, and just this influx of emotions of being out. But like the reality started hitting me, and like I was starting to feel a lot more emotions when all that happened. And like the next day they took me and they brought me here to PCC, and we went and had a meeting with Pastor Steve. And I remember just talking with him and praying with him and like actually surrendering my life to God this time, not just kind of doing it because I needed a favor, but actually truly and fully committing my life to God. And after that, I just started going to CP on Fridays and the young adult group, and just hearing Pastor Tony, that first message I was there, felt like he was talking directly to me, and I had never met him before. So it was definitely God, and it felt so real and so comforting that I didn't feel like alone, and that I felt like there was hope and a lot of stuff that I didn't understand why, but it just was happening. And so I continued to just press in, and I couldn't get enough of God, so I was going every Friday night, every Wednesday night, every Sunday, and getting as much God as I could. And I remember how excited I was after Pastor Tony had given me one of the free, like the Way FM Bibles, and just reading through that, and like just the excitement from getting like filled with that truth and with God. And it felt like that void and that darkness and that hollowness and that deadness inside of me was filled finally. Like it was the saying of like the perfect God-shaped hole, to where no matter what I was trying to fill it up with alcohol, with people, with just everything wrong, it would just always fall through. And then finally, after I found God, it felt like it just stayed full, to where there was a fullness in my life, and it felt like there was life and hope and emotion and joy. And it was an amazing time. And I remember just catching on fire for God, and like I couldn't get enough of Him and the restoration and hope that He brought in every single thing, to where I was able to restore relationships with my family and with my parents. And through a lot of the counseling and stuff like that, I was able to make amends internally, and I was able to forgive him. Going through like the trauma therapy, they were like basically, there's a bunch of things that they do to make you help process it so you don't emotionally detach and stuff. And I think of one of the most traumatic times and who was behind it. And it was one of the times with my dad. And I remember him just being like really angry and grabbing a knife and like throwing it. And because there have been other times too where he had like swung at me, like just because I didn't call him, he like would swing at me and stuff like that. And again, this was like whenever I was a grown adult, so it was kind of hard to like process that too, of like not swinging back at somebody. But then I remember like when I was still drinking, he called me on Father's Day one day and was like, "Hey boy," I was like, "Don't ever call me, man." He called again. He's like, "Don't ever effing hang up on me, and you better watch your effing mouth. You think you're a tough guy?" And I was like, "All right, dude, tell me where you're at." And like I loaded up my gun. I was like, "Tell me where you're at. And we'll find out who's messing around." I was like, "I promise you, I will stand over your dying body, and that's the last thing you'll see." And that was the last words I had spoken to him. And I was ready at that point to just hunt him down and end him. And like then after all that, I was able to forgive him and process through all that. And like that was after like the forgiveness and getting saved with God and stuff. And I remember him getting out of jail, like for all that stuff and all the probation. And I'm like, man, I hope I never see him. I was like, I don't ever want him to know I'm married. I don't want him, like, I just don't want him to be a part of my life. I'm like, I can forgive somebody and like if they find Jesus, like that's good for them, and I'll lead them to Jesus. Say like if I have like the potential, like if it just happens to be that way, I'll never put my own personal feelings above someone's eternity with God or that relationship. But I was like, I don't want to have like a personal relationship with him. And like 2 days later, we were at the store, and I remember talking to God, like, God, I don't want him to see my family. I don't want him to see anybody. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm glad he's out and whatever, but you need to do something for him. Like, I don't want to do anything with him. And we were walking down the grocery store in Walmart, and just lo and behold, guess who's there? Like, just pops around the corner. I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, hey, man. I'm like, what's up? He's like, yeah, I'm here for a battery charger because they sold my trickle charger for whatever reason. Like, you were in jail for 5 years. Like, that's why they sold your trickle charger. Like, you didn't need it for your truck. And we were in the milk section, so he was on the opposite side of the store just meandering, and we crossed paths. I was like, all right, God, like, fine. Like, I'll let it go. Like, wow. But going through that trauma therapy, I felt like it brought up a lot of emotions, and I didn't feel like I was going to be able to process them or deal with them. But then it was one of the nights of worships that they had here with Linda Cooley, and I remember going to the Sunday service and then going to the Sunday night service, and I felt like God was like just calling me forward to break that stronghold in my life. And I remember going up to the altar and like just feeling that I needed to forgive my dad again, besides just the initial like forgiving him for him being who he was, but that there was a deeper emotional forgiveness that needed to happen. And I remember after the service and everything, I went, and I knew he was staying with my grandma at the time, so I tried to call her to see if he was there so I could call and just forgive him. And he wasn't there, so I was like, all right, God, like I'm kind of okay with that. Like I didn't really want to talk to him, but you're worth it to me, God. Like being obedient is worth my emotions and my feelings. And so I thought I had just kind of dodged it, but I remember in the therapy too that I told the counselor that he, so going back, it'd be after I called him that night, like he wasn't there, and then the next day I went to the second round of counseling, and I just felt that freedom that Jesus brings, and I felt like that the worst traumatic experience had no hold on me anymore. Like I didn't feel like it had any emotional like connection. So when we were going through it, I told the therapist, I told him, I was like, hey man, I explained the situation, and I was like, I feel like God did a miracle, and I feel like that it's been healed and it's been restored. And he's like, okay, well, he's like, I believe you. I don't want to say that God's not capable of doing anything. He's like, but I want to make sure that you're not just saying this to me. So I remember he had me close my eyes and like relive the situation, and was kind of looking to make sure that like, I guess during traumatic events, there's muscles in your body that twitch and move that you don't have control over because it's held in trauma to where your body remembers it. And so he had me close my eyes, and there was no response. So he's like, oh, okay, like I believe it. Like, yeah, like I believe God did a miracle in you, and like as long as you're okay with it, like that's good. I was like, yeah. He's like, so if he was here right now, what would you do? I was like, well, I'd be able to shake his hand, give him a hug, and tell him I love him and forgive him. And he's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, like genuinely, I believe that I feel like that. And that's when I started realizing how much of a comedian God can be, and how he calls you out on your words. Because I hadn't seen my dad in 2 years at this point, and I was at my parents' house and nobody was home, and it was just me, and I took my dog outside and I was playing, and this random car just pulls up in our driveway, and lo and behold, it was my dad, and he was like still kind of, he looked like he was kind of tweaking and just out of his mind a little bit, and like I was talking to him, and I felt the Holy Spirit kind of pushing of the like, all right, time to step up. You said you'd do this, like let's go. And so I was honestly able to give him a hug, a handshake, tell him I love him and forgave him, and genuinely meant it from the bottom of my heart. And the response I got from him when I told him that was, yeah, that's one thing I learned in like the therapy in the jail is that forgiveness isn't for me, it's for you. So I'm glad you were able to get over yourself. So that was, it was difficult to process, but with God, it was hurtful, but it was able to get processed to where I didn't hold any bitterness or resentment. It was just kind of like shocking where you like forgive somebody and then they're like, oh, I'm glad you got over yourself from all the stuff that they had done. But still had that like the truthful, honest love and forgiveness for him as a person, that knowing no matter how bad he was, that he is a child of God and could walk in that light if he chooses to, and that God is a redeemer and he can redeem him just as much as he redeemed me. But I started making relationships in the church and finding friends and was doing a lot healthier stuff. And I remember having the thought where I'm like, man, ever since I've been doing this like church thing, like I have not regretted a single night of reading my Bible or going to church. I'm like, all the nights of full of regret of not wanting to go hang out. I'm like, with God, there's never been a day, a minute, a moment that I've ever regretted with God. It's all been just restoration. There was hard times, a lot of hard times, but in the end, it was all worth it, because then whenever I was processing all the trial and going to court and stuff for the charges that I was getting, I ended up getting put onto a veterans treatment court, which was a special program for veterans. And they had a panel of people that you would go see. And I had to go to mandatory counseling and therapy and stuff like that, where the counselor that I saw was like an amazing man too, and he like believed in God and stuff like that. So there was a lot of things where a lot of spiritual interaction with God just moving through him or moving through me in those moments that brought a lot of healing. And I was able to actually open up and tear down a lot of those walls that I had been building up and make an actual connection with somebody, and bring a lot of the deep cuts and wounds in my life up. And God was healing them and just moving through them. And it ended up just like going through that probation, and just that whole time of probation, it was just, kept going to church. And then the whole time I remember having the feeling and then the knowledge of reading God's word and his truth is where he says he'll never leave or forsake you. And I remember having that feeling where I was like, it doesn't matter if I feel completely alone, if there's no one in this room, no one ever with me, and I am alone in person forever, that I'll never be alone because I always have God with me. And so it filled that hole of feeling alone and abandoned to where it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about people. It was just about like I knew God was with me for forever and always. And like just progressing through, I was able to start kind of like making an impact on those around me, because they were seeing the radical, drastic change, because I went from being crazy and out of control to where all the smoking, chewing, and drinking I was doing after seeing Pastor Steve that very next day, I quit everything cold turkey, and I was drinking close to a fifth of liquor every single night, smoking like 5 or 6 cigarettes every day, and then like chewing a can of chew every day for 5 or 6 years straight. And all of that was able to stop all at the same time, cold turkey with no cravings, because God. And yeah, he broke that chain of addiction immediately. And all the people around me at my job were noticing the change. I quit cussing. I quit being mean to people and like deliberately trying to just tear them down as low as I possibly could to try to make them feel how I felt. And started trying to do my best to build people up and live the way Jesus calls us to live. And going through all that process and all that healing, I remember getting off of probation and just being involved in church and like completely changing to where the enemy took a lot from me, but God restored more than I could ever imagine, because it keeps continuing to where I was completely alone and had broken relationships and broken emotions and hardened heart and all that, to where I feel like I have a full heart now. I have good relationships with my family. I know I have a church family and church friends and that no matter where I go, the body of Christ is everywhere, and you're never alone because God's always with you, and that will always be there. That will never fall because in the end, God wins, so you know that He's always going to be there forever. And just kept going to church, and I ended up meeting my wife here at church, so now I'm married and have a wife, and we have a house and dogs, and just found out about a couple weeks ago, at the beginning of October, found out going to be a dad. So I'm super excited about that, and it's all because God. Like there's nothing I could have done or anyone else could have done for me to change or make that change. It was only God, and no matter how many times people tried for me, like God is the only one who is strong enough to break through all of that hardness and pull me out from that complete darkness and completely flip my life around from being hollow and empty to full and alive and in the light. And it's all glory to Him. And the other thing I can say to everybody else is, like, if you're praying for someone, keep praying, because it's not about what you can do, it's about what God can do, and He's bigger than everything. So just keep praying. If you don't think there's hope, there's God, and God's always stronger than everything, and He wins in the end. And I just have to give glory to God for everything He did, because I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be alive, and I wouldn't be the man I am today without Him and without His mercy and glory.